I've been paying rent for years. Real rent, $600 every single month to my own parents in my own childhood home. And when my golden child brother moved in with his wife and kids, he paid nothing, not $1. When I found out my mother expected me to pay even more to cover them, I didn't argue. I didn't fight. I just quietly packed my things, moved out, and let her find out the hard way. Now she can enjoy the freeloaders all by herself. Let me back up because this didn't happen overnight. This was almost 5 years in the making, and honestly, the roots of it go back even further than that. I moved into my parents' finished basement when I was 24. It had its own entrance around the side of the house, a small kitchenette, a bathroom, and enough space for a bed, a desk, and a life. My parents told me the rent money would help with the mortgage and the property taxes, and honestly, that made sense to me at the time. They weren't wealthy people. Dad had worked in a warehouse for 30 years, and Mom picked up part-time shifts at a pharmacy to fill in the gaps. Money had always been tight in that house, and I understood the idea of family helping family. So I paid $600 on the first of every month without missing a single payment in 5 years. I want to be clear about something because people always ask this when I tell the story. I could have afforded my own apartment. I had a stable job in logistics, decent savings, and no debt. I stayed because I told myself it was the right thing to do, and because some part of me, the part that had grown up constantly trying to prove I was the reliable one, actually liked being needed. I bought my own groceries separately from the household, kept my own shelf in the fridge, my own cabinet in the pantry. I did the yard work every single weekend because Dad's knees had gotten bad and he couldn't kneel down to garden or push the mower anymore. I shoveled the driveway in the winter before either of them woke up. I fixed the gutter one summer when it started leaking into the siding. I replaced the water heater's pilot light more than once. I never once complained because in my mind, this was what a good son did. This was the deal even if nobody had ever written it down. Meanwhile, there was my younger brother, Jack. Jack was 2 years younger than me, and from the time we were kids, the rules were different for him. If I forgot to do a chore, I got a lecture about responsibility that could last through an entire car ride. If Jack forgot, it was because he was tired or stressed or going through something. If I brought home a B on a report card, my parents asked what happened and whether I needed a tutor. If Jack brought home a C, they said he tried his best and that grades weren't everything. I used to keep score as a kid, quietly in my head, convinced that eventually the math would even out. It never did. This pattern didn't stop when we became adults. If anything, it got worse because now the stakes were higher and the excuses had more room to grow. Jack job hopped constantly. He'd start somewhere new, full of excitement, telling everyone this was finally the one, the job that was going to change everything, and within 4 to 6 months he'd quit. Always because of some conflict with a manager, or because the job was beneath his talents, or because the commute was too long, or because his coworkers didn't understand his vision. Every failure had an external cause. Every mistake belonged to someone else. And every single time, my mother had the same explanation ready, delivered with the same tired patience. He's just going through a rough patch. She'd been saying that sentence for over a decade, and somewhere along the way it had stopped being an explanation and started being a permanent excuse. I still remember one specific afternoon from when we were kids, maybe 10 and 8 years old, that always comes back to me when I think about how this pattern started. Jack had broken a window in the garage throwing a baseball he'd been told not to throw near the house. When Dad came home and saw the crack spreading across the glass, Jack burst into tears immediately, saying it was an accident, that he didn't mean it, that he felt terrible. My parents comforted him for nearly 20 minutes before anyone even mentioned fixing the window. A year later, I accidentally knocked over a lamp while vacuuming, and I remember standing there bracing for the same gentleness. Instead, Mom sighed and said I needed to be more careful, that things cost money, that I was old enough to know better. I was 2 years older than Jack had been with the window. That was the first time I noticed the difference, though it would take me another 2 decades to fully understand. Then Jack met Rachel. They got married quickly within a year of dating, and within 18 months they had their first daughter, a little girl named Mia. A second child, a boy named Ethan, followed less than 2 years later. I remember genuinely hoping, the way you hope for people even when a part of you doubts it, that becoming a father would change something in him, that the weight of 2 little kids depending on him would finally make something click into place. I remember standing at the hospital the day Mia was born, watching Jack hold her and thinking maybe this is it. Maybe this is the moment. It wasn't. If anything, Jack leaned harder into the same patterns, except now he had an even better excuse built in. He wasn't irresponsible, he was overwhelmed. He wasn't avoiding work, he was struggling to balance fatherhood with a career. Rachel, to her credit, worked when she could, picking up shifts at a dental office, but between childcare costs and Jack's unstable income, they were constantly behind on bills. And every single time they fell behind, my parents were there to catch them. A few $100s here for a car repair, a few hundred there for daycare, groceries dropped off just to help out. None of it was ever framed as a loan. It was just help, the same word that had gotten money out of my pocket for years, except when it moved toward Jack, nobody ever expected it back. Then came the Sunday that changed everything. We just finished dinner. It was an ordinary evening, roast chicken, the same worn floral tablecloth we'd had since I was a kid, the same chipped gravy boat Mom refused to replace because it had sentimental value. Dad was clearing plates when Mom asked me to stay at the table for a minute. I remember the tone of her voice immediately felt different, heavier, rehearsed almost like she'd practiced saying it in the mirror. "We've made a decision," she said, folding her hands in front of her on the tablecloth, the way she did whenever she was about to say something she knew I wouldn't like. "Okay," I said slowly, setting down my fork. "What decision?" "Jack and Rachel are moving in with us, along with the kids." I looked over at Dad. He didn't say anything. He just stared down into his coffee cup like it held the answer to a question nobody had actually asked him. That silence told me everything about who had actually made this decision, and it wasn't him. "For how long?" I asked. "Until they get back on their feet." I nodded slowly, processing it, running the numbers automatically in my head the way I do with everything. Then I asked the only question that actually mattered to me in that moment. "Are they paying rent?" The room went completely silent. Not an awkward pause, not a beat of hesitation. A real, heavy silence, the kind where you can hear the refrigerator humming in the next room and the clock ticking above the stove. Dad still didn't look up from his coffee. Finally, Mom answered. "They can't afford it right now." I actually laughed because for a split second I genuinely thought she had to be joking. She wasn't, her expression didn't move an inch. "So they'll live here for free," I said, "while I keep paying $600 a month." "That's different," she said quickly, almost defensively. "How is that different?" "Please, Daniel, you have a stable job. You're not struggling like they are." And there it was, laid out plainly on the table between the gravy boat and the half-eaten chicken. The reward for being responsible wasn't security or gratitude or even simple fairness. It was being handed someone else's burden, quietly, as if stability itself was an obligation to subsidize everyone else's instability. As if the years I'd spent doing the right thing had simply been building capacity for someone else to lean on. I didn't say anything for a moment, just sat with that thought. Then Mom added one more line, the one that told me exactly where this conversation was actually heading. "With 4 extra people in the house, our expenses are going to go up quite a bit. Groceries, water, electricity, all of it. We were hoping you could help cover a little more each month." I looked at her, and something in me went very still and very calm, the way you get when you've finally stopped being surprised by a pattern you've watched play out your entire life over and over, dressed up in slightly different clothes each time. "We both remember who heard those exact words first," I said quietly. She knew exactly what I meant. 5 years earlier, those had been almost the exact words used to get me into that basement in the first place. Family helping family. Except family in this house had only ever flowed in one direction, and I was only just now allowing myself to see it clearly. I didn't argue that night. I didn't storm out or make a scene or slam a door. I just said okay, finished my coffee, thanked Mom for dinner like nothing unusual had happened, and went downstairs to the apartment that I was starting to realize had never really been mine at all. But something inside me had already made a decision, even if I hadn't said it out loud yet. Over the following weeks, I started quietly making arrangements. I didn't announce anything. I didn't give anyone the chance to guilt me out of it or renegotiate the terms one more time the way they always had before. I looked at listings on my lunch breaks, found a small one-bedroom apartment about 20 minutes across town, above a laundromat, with decent light and a landlord who didn't ask too many questions. I signed the lease on a Thursday and told absolutely no one. Not my parents, not Jack, not even most of my friends, aside from the 2 who helped me carry furniture up a narrow staircase on a Saturday afternoon while my parents were out running errands. Slowly, box by box, weekend by weekend, I moved my life out of that basement. Clothes first, then books, then the furniture I actually owned outright. I did it during the day while my parents were at work, or late in the evening after everyone upstairs had gone to bed. The basement stayed furnished enough at a glance that nobody thought to look closely. A bed frame here, an old dresser there, just enough clutter to suggest a life still being lived downstairs. Meanwhile, Jack and Rachel settled in upstairs like they were moving into a resort rather than someone else's already strained home. New furniture appeared in the living room within the first 2 weeks. Paid for with a credit card Jack apparently opened right after moving in, one that, it would later turn out, had my father's name attached to it as well. The kids' toys spread through every room of the house, across the hallway, up the stairs, into the bathroom. The grocery bill, according to what I overheard once from the kitchen while grabbing my mail, had nearly tripled. And still, month after month, no rent appeared, no contribution. No plan to get back on their feet that anyone could actually describe if you asked them directly, which I sometimes did quietly just to see what answer I'd get. There never was one. I kept paying my $600 every month, right on schedule, transferred the first of every month like clockwork, because I hadn't officially told anyone I'd moved out yet. Part of me was curious in a detached, almost clinical way to see how long this would go on. I wanted to see if anyone would notice that the basement door hadn't opened in weeks, that my car was never in the driveway anymore after 6 in the evening, that the lights down there stayed off every single night, that the little kitchenette sat untouched, dishes dry in the rack from the last meal I'd cooked there. Nobody noticed. Not once, not for over a month and a half. That, more than anything, told me everything I needed to know about how much attention had actually been paid to me in that house versus how much energy went into managing Jack's life, Jack's moods, Jack's next crisis. During that stretch, I heard bits and pieces through relatives and the occasional phone call from Mom, who still called mostly to vent rather than to check in. Rachel had complained that the house felt too small for 6 people. Jack had started, then quit, another job after less than 2 months, this time blaming a manager who had it out for him from day one. The dishwasher broke, and instead of anyone fixing it, dishes piled up in the sink for days because nobody wanted to take ownership of the repair or the cost. My mother mentioned it almost in passing, the way you'd mention the weather, and I remember feeling nothing at all. Not satisfaction, not guilt, just distance, clean and quiet. During that same stretch, I ran into Rachel once at the grocery store before I'd told anyone I'd moved out. She looked exhausted, pushing a cart with Ethan strapped into the seat and Mia trailing beside her pulling items off shelves. We talked for a few minutes in the cereal aisle, and at one point she said almost under her breath, "I didn't think we'd still be here a year later." There was something honest in the way she said it, tired rather than defensive, and for a moment I almost felt sorry for her, caught in the middle of a situation she hadn't fully created herself. But then she added, "Your mom keeps saying you two used to pay rent here. Is that true?" I told her it was, and she just nodded slowly like some piece of information had finally clicked into place. Then one Tuesday afternoon, I stopped by to grab a few remaining items I'd left behind, some old textbooks and a lamp I'd forgotten in the move. Mom happened to be home, folding laundry in the living room. She looked up, glanced toward the basement door I'd left propped open, and her face slowly moved through confusion, then disbelief, then something close to panic. "Where is everything?" she asked, setting down the towel in her hands. "I moved out," I said simply, "about 6 weeks ago." "You didn't say anything," her voice cracked slightly on the last word. "I did try to say something," I reminded her, keeping my voice level, "at the dinner table that Sunday. You just didn't like what I had to say, so I stopped saying it out loud and just did it instead." She didn't have a response for that. For the first time in longer than I could remember, my mother was genuinely speechless, standing there with a folded towel still in her hands like she'd forgotten what to do with it. I want to say things got dramatically better after that moment, some kind of clean, satisfying turning point, but the truth is quieter than that and honestly more satisfying in its own way. I simply stopped being involved. I stopped fielding late-night calls asking me to help out a little more whenever a new expense came up. I stopped being the unpaid handyman for a house I no longer lived in, the one who fixed gutters and pilot lights for free while somebody else lived there rent-free too. My life, for the first time in years, belonged entirely to me, in an apartment where the only name on the lease was mine. Jack and Rachel ended up staying in that house for almost a full year. From what I later heard through my aunt, who never could resist sharing family updates, it was not a peaceful year. Jack never did get back on his feet because there was never any real urgency for him to. Why would there be, when every soft landing in his life had already been arranged for him since childhood? Rachel eventually grew frustrated with the whole arrangement too, tired of living under her in-laws' roof with 2 small children, a husband who treated stability as something that happened to other people, and a mother-in-law who alternated between smothering the kids with attention and criticizing how Rachel raised them. Eventually, they packed up and left, moving into a small rental across town, financed largely, I later learned, by a loan from Rachel's parents rather than anything Jack had managed to save. They didn't repay a single dollar of what they owed my parents, not for the groceries stretched over a year, not for the water and electricity bills that had spiked and never came back down. Not for the credit card furniture that stayed behind because it turned out to be furniture Jack had financed under my father's name without fully explaining that detail beforehand, something my parents only discovered when the statement arrived showing a balance neither of them remembered authorizing. They left behind more than just empty rooms upstairs. They left damaged furniture, a couch with a long tear along one arm that nobody offered to fix, a broken dishwasher nobody had disclosed until it finally gave out completely unpaid balances on at least one card linked directly to my parents' credit, and a house that, according to my mother during one of our increasingly rare phone calls, just felt drained, not just financially. Emotionally, too. The warmth that used to live in that home, the kind I remembered from childhood Sundays, had been slowly used up over the course of that year and never quite came back. The following spring, my parents put the house up for sale. They could no longer keep up with the mortgage payments. Between the missed contributions from Jack, the credit card debt attached to my father's name, and a full year of expenses that never balanced out the way anyone had promised, the math simply stopped working. The very house they'd once insisted needed my $600 a month just to survive was now being sold out from under them, not because of anything I had done, but because of exactly the arrangement they had chosen over me. Back at that dinner table without a second thought. A week before closing, my phone rang late in the evening. It was Mom's. We talked for a few minutes about nothing important at first. The movers she'd hired, the small apartment she and Dad had found, the weather, small pieces of a conversation neither of us really wanted to have but both felt obligated to get through. Then she got to the real reason for the call, her voice dropping into something softer, more careful than I'd heard from her in years. "I was wondering," she said slowly, "if you'd consider moving back in with us for a while, just temporarily, to help us get back on our feet financially until things settle." The silence hung between us for a long moment before I answered, longer than the silence at that dinner table years earlier, and somehow it felt like the same silence, stretched out across time, waiting to see if anything had actually changed. "I don't live there," I said quietly, and I let the silence sit exactly as long as it needed to, without rushing to fill it with an explanation or an apology the way I always used to. She didn't ask again after that. There was nothing left to negotiate, because there was no leverage left either, no basement to dangle, no guilt to lean on that hadn't already been spent. I wasn't angry when I said it. I wasn't trying to punish her, not really. I simply meant it as plainly as it sounded. I didn't live there anymore in that house, or in that role, the one where my stability existed purely to subsidize everyone else's chaos, while being told it was simply what family did. Some people, when I've told this story, say I should have helped my parents no matter what, that blood is blood and family is family regardless of history. But 5 years of $600 a month, 5 years of separate groceries and weekend yard work and gutter repairs and pilot lights relit in the middle of winter, that was help. That was more than enough help, more than most people ever give without complaint. What they wanted from me at the end wasn't help anymore. It was a second act of the exact same arrangement that had already failed once, spectacularly, and I wasn't willing to fund it again, not with my money and not with my silence. I still speak to my parents now occasionally, mostly around holidays. We're not estranged, not in the dramatic sense people sometimes imagine, but the dynamic has changed permanently, and honestly, for the first time in my adult life, it feels fair. I pay my own rent now in my own apartment for myself, on a lease with only my name on it. Nobody guilts me into covering anyone else's mortgage over dinner. Nobody tells me family should help family while only ever pointing that phrase in one single direction. If there's a lesson in any of this, it's a simple one I wish I'd understood at 24 instead of 29. Being the responsible one in a family doesn't mean you owe endless proof of it, over and over indefinitely, while someone else's irresponsibility gets rewarded with a rescue every single time. Sometimes the quietest form of standing up for yourself isn't a confrontation at all. It isn't raised voices or slammed doors or dramatic declarations across a dinner table. Sometimes it's simply stepping back quietly without announcement and letting people feel the full, undiluted weight of the choices they made finally on their own. If this story hit close to home for you, if you've ever been the reliable one who ended up quietly paying for someone else's rescue while it was called something else, let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more real stories of Reddit Reads.